The Brooklyn Nets have the night off, but that doesn't mean that they can't make some headway in the playoff push. As we'll look around the league, talk about the implications of Charlotte, of Atlanta, of Cleveland, who are on the court tonight, and break down why maybe none of that matters if you take a look over at the betting odds these days, coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. It's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbert covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. Over there, though, is the sultry sounds of Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is also brought to you by NBA Top Shot. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Own officially licensed, rare NFTs of the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Doug, as we will get into what's going on around the Eastern Conference and the implications it can have on Brooklyn, the maybe starting off point, though, I think more critically, is how, as I said at the top, maybe it doesn't matter what these other teams do because Vegas tells us a totally different story here, man.
Well, hopefully it doesn't matter. I mean, you can see this in the video. Look at the gray in this beard. This is from this season. Like, this is from, there's nothing.
Full head of hair and not an ounce of gray when the season started.
If you would see me back in September, I mean, a body like an Adonis, hair flowing everywhere.
3 inches taller.
Beard as brown as the day is long, and now it's just all gone to pot. I mean, God, no. I mean, like, I got into, I flew in the other night, just wait for the week, and then got in just in time to watch the last 5 minutes of the Nets game, went back and watched it again today, and then just did a quick odds roundup on where where things stood after they fell to the 9th seed behind Charlotte and no longer own the tiebreaker, which I thought was, that's pretty important because, that they're going to need a few other things to swing their way. We're going to, like you said, but we're going to update where everyone is here in the Eastern Conference standings in a moment. But, it's shocking to me still that if you go to our friends at betonline.net, where you see the NBA championship odds right now, and the Nets are still the second overall favorite behind the Suns. Like, I can't. And, it's funny. You and I talked a little bit about this pre-show where, I mean, I lived like basically my entire life in odds and betting lines over the last, 7 years or something like that, between player projections, minutes, odds, everything. And I tend to really actually, and especially in coin flip situations, default to whatever the odds are, right? I think that's just a good way to live your life. Like, Vegas and, the ubiquitous term for Vegas, which is just betting markets, are going to get this stuff right. That's why they're all still in business and we get it, right? And because it's really, really, really smart analytically. And so I think in when you're unsure of how to feel, those are actually a good litmus test to go and say to yourself, hey, this is actually how I should feel, because this is like a lot of really good analytical people with a lot of money on the line have worked this out. And yet I have this like weird uncanny valley thing with this. I cannot fathom for my life how they're the second overall favorite right now behind the Suns as the 9th seed with just a few games to go. Like, doesn't it seem nuts? And and this is me saying I default to this stuff all the time, and right here I cannot get over the hump with this.
Well, by the way, because it's even harder to do it after coming off a game where they lost to the Charlotte Hornets, a game that you actually have to win, because there are times when we talked about the playing game, if you fall to the 9th seed where you are now, the 10th, and then you have to win multiple games to get there, even the two for one opportunity to officially lock into the 7th or 8th seed. Okay, great. But on paper, maybe first of all, I just go, mine's at ease. This is why I said the Nets are going to be fine. But also on paper, you look at it and go, are any of these teams at the back end of the Eastern Conference really that much of a concern? So is, what Bet Online is telling us and what the Vegas numbers are telling you is like, yeah, those teams, the odds of those teams upsetting Brooklyn in a win or go home scenario are so slim that we're almost looking past that. Now, you and I, following the team every single day and tracking every up and down of their season, probably can look inside of those and point to several examples out there. You go, well, the Nets have lost to teams that you might not think they have any business losing to, including Sunday, when you go, that's one that you should walk in and absolutely make a statement, just like you did the night before against Miami. and you don't. And it only takes one game like that to completely throw this thing off the rails. So I'm surprised by it. And maybe in the end, it comes out in the wash that Vegas doesn't want to move too far off that number for fear of what could come when the Brooklyn Nets surge into the playoffs as an 8th seed.
It's really just that, right? It's just the range of outcomes is so wide that it's like, I'm not putting, I'm of course saying that they're better than any of these teams down at the bottom. The Hornets result the other night aside, there's no world where they're just over a 7-game series not better than these other teams. I think that goes without saying.
Sure.
It's just that the range of outcomes is so high on them not even kind of making it, because again, these aren't 7-game series that they have to get through the playing games. These are one and done, like NCAA tournament style things.
Yeah.
And at that point, you can just lose games. Like we've seen this too many times. It just, they would be the favorite in each game, almost for sure. But just getting them out of that scenario where they right now as a 9th seed could have to play 2 of these games just to get into the grind of an NBA 7-game series playoffs. Like that's the part where I can't believe one of these other teams, like specifically Milwaukee, to me, has sort of not vaulted over them. Every team in the East has their flaws.
Yeah, that was giving me my question, was about how much also is it predicated on, we know the Nets make the trade and Harden goes to Philly, but now he's stumbled a little bit and they haven't exactly planted their flag as being one of the top teams. Boston has certainly surged as the year has gone on. Miami, we just beat them Nets beat them on Saturday night. So is it also as much a product of, well, has anybody else in the East really said we're the team? And I think Milwaukee should be that team, obviously having won the chip, but maybe that's what keeps the numbers relative, right?
I think that is it, because there are flaws with all these other teams. Like, they just smoked Miami at home the other night, so it's not like they can't beat this team pretty resoundingly. We all get that. I think Milwaukee, I would put Milwaukee probably above them right now, just on like ease of getting into the playoffs. Yeah. Plus, we just know they basically just did it with essentially this core group minus PJ Tucker, right? So like it's like that. And then all these other teams sort of do have problems, right? Like, is Philly a complete enough team to be able to do it? I mean, they're probably pretty close, but it's unclear. And then as you get down a little further, some of these teams have really been hit with injuries. Like, Evan Mobley just got hurt and they're already without Jared Allen for the Cavs. And then there's just other problems with some of these other teams. Like, I don't think anyone thinks the Bulls are contenders, right? The Celtics just lost Robert Williams, maybe for the whole year. Like, so there's definite issues around some of these other teams. And that probably, as much as anything, speaks to it. It speaks to why it's even in the conversation, right? Like if any one of these other teams was running away with it, like a la the Suns, or even honestly, even the Memphis Grizzlies, if they were in the Eastern Conference or something like that, I think it would be hard. You'd be hard pressed to put the Nets ahead of any of these teams. But that's just simply not the case right now. So
yeah, it'd be a tragedy if they were out in the Western Conference, right?
Well, it was funny because what's funny about that, because the Western Conference at the bottom is way worse than the East. This is right now the Spurs might just back into the playing game at 30 and 44 because the Lakers stink so bad, right? Like there's teams that are in the playing game in the West right now that are 3 of the 4 teams in the playing game in the West are below 500. So So in the West, they'd be kind of locked in. So, but they're better at the top though.
That's what I was gonna say, was like those top teams is where you'd say, but you would see other teams starting to push them down in the odds, because listen, Memphis at the top there, Phoenix obviously in the 1 seed. I guess though, even in that scenario, if we're just kind of taking a broad stroke around the NBA, it's like Golden State has questions despite being the 3 seed. Yeah. They're trying to figure out if they're going to be fully ready to go when it comes to the playoff push too. So maybe it's just kind of the theme, and Brooklyn is somewhat luck potting into getting healthy, getting Kyrie back full time at the right moment here as they head towards the playoffs.
And it's just more, really, again, it's my being flabbergasted is not around the talent on the Nets. It has very little to do with that. It's that, because I think talent wise, we've seen that a lot of these teams are flawed, and the Nets have arguably the best player in a playoff series when he's on, in Durant. So I get why the odds are on the higher side. It's more just that, like, they have so much more to overcome than any other team that's even in this range. It's more about what they have to overcome that I'm having trouble still reconciling why it is that they're there. But like you said at the top, if we are going to if I'm going to live my life trusting these odds, because again, more times than not, you will be correct based on a probabilistic, sort of standard, then maybe I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have had. Yeah, I shouldn't have had my hair kneading as gray at the rapid pace that it did. That's how you tie an entire segment together. Okay, we have tons more to talk about and sort of how some of this Eastern landscape is shaping up. We definitely have learned some stuff over the course of this evening that is going to shine a little more light about where the Nets stand and what is going to look like for them going into the rest of the week. At the top, Adam definitely mentioned NBA Top Shot. Look, NBA Top Shot, you have to get into this, folks. It is the next wave of just getting into the NBA, right? We've had the playing card craze for forever. Now you actually have the chance to own moments from NBA history in the first officially licensed NFT of the NBA. It's got the community to back it up. It's the future of what being an NBA fan looks like. Part trading card, part stock market, part fantasy sports. It's got a built-in loyalty program. It's really just basically from the ground up. They came out of the box and just hit an absolute home run with NBA Top Shot. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, like, why would I get these clips that you could just watch on YouTube? Why would I want to buy something that is just out there for free? It's because you're getting an ownership in these moments that you can track over the lifetime. And once they're gone, they're gone. I mean, this is a once in a lifetime experiences, and you have the ability to have ownership over these. For example, last year, Top Shot flew out of a group of fans to Phoenix for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. That's the kind of community thing you want to be a part of as well. Tell me when last time a baseball card did that for you. It just doesn't happen. If you sign up for Top Shot today, the best way to start is to get yourself a starter pack. Super easy. You get in there, you open them up just like a trading card pack, and you're going to get those moments for yourself. You can pull a moment, maybe a superstar, maybe you grab a LeBron or a KD right out of the bat, and you can just get those for $9. Head on over to lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Let me give that to you again to make sure you get it. lockedon.nbatopshot.com to start building your collection today.
Oh, and friends, we got to tell you about that great new app called Truebill. That's because it helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. Turns out my girlfriend and I have been paying for the same exact TV subscription service for the last 6 months. That's why, on average, people can save up to $720 a year with Truebill, because companies make it super difficult to go ahead and get those subscriptions canceled for you. Truebill makes it incredibly simple. You link your accounts. Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap, and their fancy term coming for you, Truebill Concierge, will even negotiate a better rate on the apps that you want to keep. Truebill has over 2 million users and helps save them over $100 million. Don't fall for subscription scams anymore. Start canceling today at truebill.com/lockedonnba. Go right now to truebill.com/lockedonnba. It could save you thousands a year. So, as we turn our attention to the games that are going on currently here, we were going to start with, because we're doing this on what is Monday night, games are wrapping up. The Cleveland game wrapped, but right inside of this moment, down to the wire here on what's the most critical one for the Brooklyn Nets, Charlotte playing against Denver, 112-109. We'll let that go official here and just let everybody know, Doug, that we talk about the movement in the East. Cleveland did go ahead and get a 107-101 victory over Orlando.
Yeah, but let me throw in a note in that one, though. They did win that game, which kind of stinks for the Nets, but they did lose Evan Mobley. Look, we never cheer for injuries. Injuries are the worst things that can happen in sports. So you'd never want to never be the group of fans that like roots for another team's injury.
I want to be the team at full health. I always want the battle at full health, right?
Bad juju, very bad juju in the old, using analytical terms. That is not what you want to land on. What you want to land on your side. But Evan Mobley did get hurt. It's unclear what his timeline is going to be, but he went down early and did not return with an ankle injury. They are already without Jared Allen. Like, they've been really brutalized with injuries. It's probably a really uphill climb to think that they dropped this many games, because after this one, the Nets are still 3 games back from the Cavs. But I'm just throwing it in there as a note, because when we get down to the end of the season, these key players are as important as ever, especially a guy like Mobley, who was essentially playing upwards of 39-ish minutes a game with Jared Allen out, because they've really needed his size. So just throwing it in there. They did win, but something to just keep an eye out for.
And if we're going to put this into the spectrum, you mentioned they're 3 games up. They're sitting there in the 7th seed, as we'll wait for the Charlotte score to go final, which is probably coming up in a second here. We might as well tell you the one score we're not going to get to the end of is going to be that Toronto game. And the reason why we can mention it is because if Toronto loses, which they are on the downside of it right now against Boston's B squad, that could start to flip. We could see some movement there, right? At the 6th, the 7th seed, which reintroduces the issue that the Nets don't want to have going on the road at any point to do the play-in games in Toronto, the one location that Kyrie Irving wouldn't be available to play.
Yeah, this is another weird one because like you're kind of rooting for Boston because you want the Raptors to drop, but at the same time, you don't want to have to go play Toronto. By the way, Boston just doing this with their total B squad. Tatum, Brown, Horford, and Williams. Williams is hurt, but the other three just sat out this game. And like the Derek White and Marcus Smart show is as of right now hanging in with the Raptors. It's just I think Denver's going to win this game, but it's just funny that we're just, again, I'll never be not surprised that here on March 28th, like this is the conversation. I'm happy to do it because like this almost feels like playoff basketball time for me. I wish it was not feeling like that for the Nets. I wish they were in tune-up mode for a championship run because like that is the better feeling around this. At times when you can get like this late in the season, you're playing out the string and just kind of like getting yourself set, getting yourself healthy. You're not going to run too many minutes. Like this is where you sort of hope to be at this point of the season if you're on the championship trajectory. With 6 games left in the schedule now, like the part where we're sweating out what the Torontos and Charlottes and other teams, Cleveland to some degree, Atlanta's, what they do in it every single night does actually have this sort of playoff feel to it. Yeah. And I think because I think some of these games for Nets fans, I wouldn't call it appointment viewing, but you can like know what you actively want to happen here. I think like that, and that does feel sort of like a playoff atmosphere. So I don't love being in this case, but if you are a fan of sports and you're a fan of the Nets, like on an every night basis from now on, like we are going to have something to tune into. Again, it's Monday night. The Nets are not playing, and we're as locked into some of these games as any net game we've been in this season.
No, 100%. And the Charlotte-Denver game goes final 113-109. So Charlotte now, again, this is why Vegas gets it, man. It's why BetOnline gets it, because the Nets didn't have to do anything, and they're going to jump themselves back into the 8th seed tonight because Charlotte's going to fall a half game behind them, and then we'll see what happens, obviously, with the Hawks game in the 10th spot. So the Nets are going to push themselves up to the 7th seed just by sitting still. That's cool. And also, though, to your point now, still be sweating what's happening in behind them and ahead of them. I have a very weird, like, philosophical question kind of about where they are in the standings right now in this moment versus what could happen. Oh, and the Atlanta game went final, too. So they won 132-123 over the Pacers. So is this still... That's the best scenario is Charlotte losing and the Nets getting back up to 7, right? I mean, that was the number one thing you wanted to check tonight while the Nets aren't playing. So you at least get that. And you would wish, again, like you say, arguing against yourself, you'd really wish Toronto could get this win now and get some distance between them and Cleveland in the 6th spot.
Well, I mean, again, and not to like the ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, but like it just does reinforce of what a disaster loss that Hornets game was on Sunday. And I know you talked about it. I know you talked about it on the podcast yesterday, and I guess we can relitigate some of it, but it really, like, you never want to call games must wins, because I do think in the old, to borrow from Michael K, the adage like that, that's a silly term, nothing is a must win. Yeah, that's mostly correct. And that one, of all the ones that you really probably needed to pull off to give yourself like extra breathing room and at home and all the narrative piece that went on into that game, losing that one against the Hornets like really stings. Like it's just such a stinger to just all the things that went into that game to not walk away with the W. It just really sucks.
That's very clever, right? You sting Hornet. I get it. You're good. Yeah.
Didn't even mean to.
No, I knew you. I mean, oh, never mind. The point is though, because, and it's funny too, not even to rehash that game, but on YouTube when I was breaking that down and saying, I think I kept referring to as critical. Sometimes you end up saying must win, but saying critical. And some people were pushing back a little bit, which I understood, saying like, listen, they're still going to be okay. And then the game like this happens tonight. Charlotte loses. You get right back into the 7th seed. And it's kind of like that game never really happened. But from a momentum standpoint, to your point, getting Kyrie back for home games and looking at the landscape of the East, like I just think every game is critical / as close to must win territory, just from a figuring it out and feeling like you're firing on all cylinders. And when you lose a game like that at home against Charlotte, that feels like, we should not have had that be the case, right? That always ends up being where I land on depending on the matchup. Whereas the night before, if you lost the game to Miami, well, we know what Miami's capable of. So it's that weird thing of making statement wins and then having some level of letdown that I think can be a little bit frustrating, at least from my perspective. As you said it at the top of this segment, very much in playoff kind of mentality now, where a loss feels like inexcusable. Could not possibly afford to have that be the case.
And it's a little too much of me probably being prisoner of the moment in terms of, look, yes, it's all just kind of one game, and there's always ways for these things to shake out. There's always ways for these things to sort of shake out on the more positive side, because it's not the last game of the season and there's still opportunities for other things to go right. I do have a big complaint about the game yesterday, though. I want to get to this one because this is one thing. I was on a plane when it first ended. I knew you were gonna watch it, but I did, in the moment, I was like, I'm going to call Adam from this plane and just like have him and just do 5 minutes on this problem that I had. So we'll get to that in a second.
Of course we will, but first we'll tell you about our friends over at RockAuto.com. Oh, you know about them. You're over there at your local auto parts store. You say you need the flange. That's that little knob between the doodad and the zingwigger. I know about vehicles. The guy walks back in, knocks off some dust from a box, brings it out to you. You pay an extremely high price, and you don't even know if it's the correct part. Why spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership when you can go over to rockauto.com, use their incredibly easy to use drop-down menu, find your make and model, year of your car, the right car part, guaranteed, and at a great price. I, of course, had to replace my headlight lamps on my Honda Insight the other day. Right over. Boom, boom, boom. And I checked compared to my local auto parts store. It was like 40% more if I drove 20 minutes over, probably to have somebody give me the part that I didn't actually need. You go over to rockauto.com and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. So as we continue to round out this conversation, I want to ask you the philosophical one about the standings in the East here, but it's good because you and I did touch base before we started. I ended up kind of talking about offensively some things that you could have done differently, the zone that Charlotte threw at them, the three-point shooting, the lack of defensive rotations for the Brooklyn Nets, but I didn't get back around to, because it felt like a lot of negative meat on that proverbial bone, to Drummond and Claxton and their usage late in that game.
Yeah, I just don't have any idea why Drummond was closing this game. I turned it on originally with a 6-minute mark. Like I went back and watched everything, so no worries there. I get that Drummond was having like a very good statistical game. I get that he was sort of like doing the imposing of his will on the interior. They have more of a traditional center in Mason Plumlee, so you can play him for longer minutes. I get all that, but near the end of the game, when the game is basically on the line and they are picking out matchups sort of over and over and over again in terms of like what they want to get. I mean, Drummond got cooked like 3 times, and they were able to get to the rim multiple times with Bridges, with Melo. Like they were like, yes, it was so easy to see that it was coming. And because of course, like what you want to do, get Drummond to a one-on-one matchup at the top of the key and just absolutely blow by him, because that and like it's not even his fault really. Like he's not capable of lasting in that switch for long times when you have a guy on the bench who is like made to do that. And Nick Claxton, like that is like what his core functionality is. And it's not even like you lose a ton to Mason Plumlee, who was still in the game for that stretch near the end. I mean, probably just mostly to deal with Drummond on the other end, but it wasn't like it was winning you tons of stuff. I just don't really understand it. I don't understand why, after the first or second or third time that this is happening, why he's like still in the game. It's a slight nitpick. Look, Kyrie doesn't go like 2 for 17 to start the game. We're probably not even talking about it. I totally get it. But in the end there, when it's very obvious that like this is what they want to do against you offensively, and Drummond just simply cannot hold the line, you have to get him out of there. Like I just don't. In the moment, I was like screaming this, like it's insane that he's still in the game, like borderline close. He lasted to the last minute when they basically just needed to come out. Like for him to play that whole 8-minute stretch, it was bad to me.
This is so for me. This was the interesting part. I think it ties into the philosophical question heading down the stretch. Now, LaMarcus Aldridge was available for that game. He doesn't play. I said this on the last episode. A lot of times, just because the Brooklyn Nets players are listed as available doesn't mean they're actually ready to be on the court for them. But what is the best version of this line? Now, understanding what Drummond brings for certain phases of the game, certain facets of the game, what Aldridge brings specifically on the offensive end and the mid-range shooting. But I just, how are Nash and the Nets coaching staff going to navigate that position and figuring out the right combination here, or figuring out the workload? Because there's a world normally when you're a championship caliber team and you have those odds to win the championship, you're not talking about So do we want to use all three of these players every single game throughout the playoffs? Because I can paint you scenarios where if you choose not to, there's versions of it where Kyrie's having a better shooting night and it really doesn't matter if Drummond's a bit of a detriment defensively on certain assignments and switches. Okay, fine. But I can paint scenarios when you're tight playoff games that you want to run Claxton out there for a 5-minute burst to help on the defensive end, that you're going to need LaMarcus Aldridge to hit a couple of mid-range shots, and you're obviously going to need the size and the strength on the interior for Drummond. Can you see a world where that ends up being the case? Because I don't know if I'm trying to convince myself of it, where I'm like, you probably need to use all three of these guys throughout the playoffs, because otherwise you're going to have conversations like these in post games.
I mean, it's so easy to me. In a game where you just need hardcore defensive stops against like a long rangey wing ready team, like, is there any world where you want Andre Drummond on the court? I just
exactly.
don't, and then to extrapolate that out, if these games are playoff games and you're not facing, because these are all, every game from now on for the Nets is a playoff game.
Yep.
Like that's not a hyperbole. I'm not overstating it. Like, they have to win these games, like, to make the playoffs. So every game needs to be treated like every game needs to be treated like a playoff intensity game. Is there a world outside of what you're facing, Joel Embiid and maybe Jokic, that you want Andre Drummond on the court to close games? No. Like, there's just not, it's just not the best version of a good closing lineup that gives you good flexibility, enough on the defensive end to be able to switch into and to not get overrun into switches, and to, like, last just enough on the offensive glass and be able to just handle some of the other team's best defenders, especially around the perimeter. Like, I just don't, that to me seems like a very easy answer. Like I said, we do not and never did picture Andre Drummond closing playoff games for them. He's a stopgap. He's an innings eater. He's done a great job. I've loved every single moment of it, basically, because I just kind of knew what we were getting, and he's mostly given that. But in situations like this that are very, very high leverage, the other team wants him to be out there. Like, and in that scenario, you have to remove him. And it seems so plain as day in the game, especially when they're just down. Like, you're down. Like, you need to come back. Like, what world is he helping you with that?
And by the way, and this extends to, and we'll come back to this on the next off day for the Brooklyn Nets and talk about it, because LaMarcus Aldridge is gearing up to return, and yet he is no more effective of a defensive stopper in those switching scenarios than Andre Drummond is, right? So I don't know, painting that picture and saying you don't want Drummond closing games, you don't want LaMarcus Aldridge closing the games, which is why the push that we've seen from Nicolas Claxton has been impressive, and why I think now every time over the remainder of the season, we're going to look and say, if you don't have him out there, you're going to be hard-pressed to find me a time when it makes more sense to go with anybody else, let alone some of the offensive things that he's been doing, transition, the pace of play that he brings to the court here. I think go ahead.
Can we just throw in one more thing, too? It's another thing, too, where, okay, look, you want to, like, say Kessler Edwards should get more minutes. I saw some people saying that. I don't know. I can see that both ways. Like, he's taken as much as he's given, like, it's just, but Claxton, the other weird thing about it here is that I guess it was foul trouble early. Like, he had some foul trouble, so I guess that kind of buzzes off his minutes. But at that point, he still has 4 fouls. You can just have him play that. You can have him play the game.
Use the last 2 fouls. Foul out.
And we're coming off what I believe is one of his best stretches of the entire season. Like, he's played so well of late for the Nets, like, kind of just done everything they needed, gotten better with the ball in his hands, been better finishing around the rim, been more confident in his reads. The defense has never really sagged off at any time this season, has really just been excellent. So it's not even like he's been this mystery. Like, last year when he was buried, right? And we're like, okay, well, we're not sure what we're going to get, but it's not even a mystery now. Like, right. He's coming off arguably one of his strongest stretches. Did he have some rough patches in this game? Sure, but you still need to go back to it. Like, you still cannot abandon it. And maybe I'm harping too long on just like one move or whatever. And I for those that listen to the podcast know, and Adam and I think we're both very good at this. We don't retroactively change our mind based on results often, right? Like, it's like if I felt it strongly in the moment, I will just admit it. And if it was wrong, it was wrong, but I felt it strongly in the moment. Like, it will never going to be like, I'm very rarely going to be results based. I want to believe that we're very honest with this. That's the other reason I'm kind of getting more passionate about it, is because it was just something I was thinking in the moment, and it just worked out, like I said, exactly like how I thought it would.
Listen, a handful of episodes ago, I was critical about Kevin Durant and some lackadaisical passing. The game against Charlotte, I was critical against Kyrie Irving for not attacking downhill more when his shot wasn't falling for him, and also critical of Steve Nash of maybe not, at least in that game, using a little more Kessler Edwards, thinking about using a Cam Thomas, wondering why Claxton is not in there in the closing sequences. So we'll see how it plays out. There's a handful of more games to flesh this out, but I thought and I expect to see a little bit more refinement around expectations. So there'll be off days to discuss this a little bit deeper. Just to tie a bow on it here, when we look around the Eastern Conference, obviously with the win by Atlanta, with the win by Cleveland, Charlotte going down there, we now officially
I'm watching Toronto and Boston off to the side here. Like Toronto, they just hit a big we're not going to get to the end of it. It's okay. Boston's winning by 2. There's about 30 seconds left, so we're not going to get to the end of this one before we stop.
We never know. Now let me read what I see. But Atlanta is in the 10th spot now. They're still just a game back of Brooklyn. Charlotte's in the 9th spot, a half game back. Cleveland is 3 games ahead of Brooklyn for the 7th seed, and then as it stands right now, hanging in the balance there, 3.5 games are Toronto up in the 5 seed. And I guess, you know what, man, actually, and I'm not even doing this to extend it, but it is noteworthy that if you're pulling for Toronto to win, there's still the world where they can catch Chicago, who right now is only a game ahead of them in the standings. So there is still
losing to the Knicks as we speak.
So if we can get that to pull out, now all of a sudden, at least from the standpoint of, the worst case of some team ending up in the 7th seed and the Nets have to, okay, we'll take Chicago, fine. A game where we can go on the road and still be able to use Kyrie Irving. So that version is still in play there. Keith McPherson and I, strong as we try to ride out for that. The post game I would have done after Miami when the Nets won that would have been like, Doug and I have battered around what's going to happen here down the stretch, and I'm feeling pretty good about them surging. Unfortunately, they had to play Charlotte, and I was like, a little more in Doug's favor, but we'll see. We'll see. It's a moment to moment, man. We're living moment to moment. Get us out of here.
This one went to commercial, so we're not going to get there. Okay. We will be back in tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe over to Locked On Nets YouTube. Climbing toward 2,000 subscribers over there. Much appreciated, everyone that's jumped in over there. So make sure, I'll put the link in the show notes. Make sure you like and subscribe. Every single episode will go up on Locked On Nets YouTube.
And of course, guys, this is about the grind, the hustle, and making your way towards the playoffs. Why? Because I'm not out there sweating for 3 hours every day just to find out what it feels like to sweat. Michael Jordan.
Ooh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow after the game talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.